Welcome everyone to the most exciting night of our academic calendar in the School of Translational Medicine, and that is the annual STM public lecture, where we have an opportunity to highlight to our community much more broadly some of the fantastic and world-leading transformational research that comes out of the School of Translational Medicine at Monash University. I'm Terry O'Brien. I'm have the privilege to be the head of this school and to proudly boast about all the fantastic work that is done, such as FODMAP from the Department of Gastroenterology. I want to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional owners of the lands we are on tonight, the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we acknowledge and uphold that continuing connection to land and waterways in which we work and live and thrive. Thank you to everybody who's come here in person on this inclement Melbourne evening. We've got to love the weather in Melbourne, don't you? And for those many people who have registered online, welcome to you all out there in cyberspace. Little disclaimer, I've been asked by the organisers to point out the obvious, that this talk tonight does not constitute medical advice, even if it's something that seems quite relevant to you. The Low-FODMAP diet is best undertaken with the supervision of an accredited dietitian. This year's School of Translational Medicine public lecture, as I've mentioned already, we're highlighting the Low-FODMAP diet team. The Monash University Low-FODMAP diet is a made in Melbourne, made at Monash translational research success story that this year celebrates the 20th anniversary since their first publication. The Low-FODMAP diet is a really brilliant example of academic-led evidence-based research that's made a huge difference to the lives of countless people around the globe with irritable bowel syndrome, endometriosis and other conditions. The researchers in the Department of Gastroenterology in the School of Translational Medicine, or the Central Clinical School as it was called then, at Monash University, did the original research that came up with the concept of FODMAPs and then to establish the efficacy of Low-FODMAP diet. Monash researchers showed that irritable bowel syndromes improve in 3 out of 4 people who follow their Low-FODMAP diet, and other research groups from all over the world have since replicated these results. Because of this, Low-FODMAP diet is now recommended as the first treatment of choice for people diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. And a quick Google, we see pages of Google from all around the world about the FODMAP diet. So it has really made an impact everywhere. Avoiding FODMAPs looks complicated, but the team has not just done the research to discover this, but also have worked creatively to make it much more straightforward through apps, cookbooks, accreditation, training for dietitians, short courses for patients, and testing a multitude of everyday foods. This work has involved research with clinical labs and lab testing, education, implementation science, and commercial engagement. Tonight we'll hear from 3 of the key FODMAP academic leaders in the Department of Gastroenterology. Firstly, Professor Peter Gibson, previous head of the department, who will take us back to the ancient times in the beginning. And then Professor Emma Helmos will talk about the research and clinical aspects, and Associate Professor Jane Muir will then follow up and talk about research translation, and particularly how doctors and scientists get the information they need to impact the lives of people and how it makes a difference to those lives. So no further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Gibson to take us back to the beginning. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks very much, Terry, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming tonight, and all of you out there in Zoom land. I intend to tell you a little bit about the history of how it started, because it was all very exciting times, and believe it or not, the exciting times continue. So at the turn of the century, I'm a gastroenterologist, and at the turn of the century, here's a patient who came to see me. It's Julie. And Julie was a 25-year-old school teacher. She had 2 years of abdominal pain, 2, 3, 4 years, she wasn't quite sure, of abdominal pain most days. She had bloating every day, worse during the day, and at its peak at night. She had erratic bowel habits, and she felt tired all the time, and her life was not good. The pain, she said, was better if she didn't eat, but of course you can't survive not eating. And she knew that it was triggered by, the symptoms were triggered by eating. She said, this is crazy because I have a very healthy diet and it has to be something I'm eating because of that. Well, she came to see me. Here I am, and I had a bit more hair then. And this combination of abdominal pain and bloating and change in bowel habits it goes on for a long time, is very characteristic of irritable bowel syndrome. And it's very easy to diagnose for a gastroenterologist. It's also very easy to educate, to reassure, but unfortunately we didn't have great therapies. I gave her some antispasmodic just to help her with her bad pain, and then sent her on her way. Perhaps I got her to reduce her fibre a little bit, but I knew that wouldn't have done very much because we used to do these things, but without very much success. So Julie left my rooms, and I know what she did. She tore her hair out. She was so frustrated. And she'd seen doctors before and was continuing to be frustrated. And I left the room and I was frustrated, and that's how I lost most of my hair. Because, we had this as the most common problem that gastroenterologists would see in their rooms, and we were very relatively ineffective at managing it. And I had a long history of working in laboratory research with dietary things and carbohydrates, and I had the view that there has to be a diet for IBS. So what I needed was an idea, a hypothesis. And this is what you do in science. You develop a hypothesis, you think it's going to work, and you work out whether it does work or not. And there are two things that I've learned over my career that is important about a good idea, good hypotheses, is that it doesn't come from one person. You don't sit there in bed at night and suddenly there's a wonderful idea and no one's ever thought about anything like it before. It has to have many brains. The second thing is that good ideas are usually simple, but they rarely come from a blank canvas. In other words, they don't sort of come and you develop something which no one knows anything about, never heard of anything like this before. Now, getting many brains was an easy task. And here's our initial brain trust. We had Sue Shepherd, who was a passionate dietitian, Jane Muir, who was a passionate and very successful scientist and dietitian, Jackie Barrett, and Emma Halmos, who's here tonight, who were young dietitians, bright, willing to really put in and develop new ideas. So what was on the canvas already? What did we already know that we could actually develop this from? And what I've done here is put in a little panel of all the years of where these things occurred. And there's, you can see the brain trust up there when we started to put the brains together. Well, over there, from 1965 and on, there had been lots of work done where people had identified these short-chain carbohydrates, sugars or little chains of sugars that caused symptoms like IBS. Lactose, polyols like sorbitol, windy foods, the baked beans, which have got galacto-oligosaccharides in them, and fructose, which is first recognised in the fruit juice diarrhoea in children in 1978. And fructans was the other part which were first identified in 1987. And it was no surprise that through all of these things, diets had been developed. Lactose-free diet, fructose and sorbitol-free diet. And these diets had all been published, but when you gave them to people with irritable bowel, they didn't seem to work too well. Because basically what they did, they worked when people had masses of that particular substance. So if they had masses of lactose and they couldn't digest lactose, the diet worked beautifully. But anyone with IBS, most people didn't have masses of these things. And so these diets really didn't move very well. Then came the light bulb moment when it didn't happen in a moment, it happened over a period of time. But it makes a good story to say suddenly it just clicked. And the hypothesis was there. And I said the hypotheses are usually, good ones are usually simple. And this hypothesis was 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. In other words, if you have each of these things, all of these sugars and short-chain carbohydrates, and you had a little bit of each, they all did the same thing in the gut, so they would have a magnified effect. So why not, instead of restricting one of them, restrict all of them? And we developed the restrict all of them diet. And it seemed to work. So unfortunately, Houston, we have a problem came up, because the big problem was, first of all, that the RAOT diet is not a good name. It was never going to catch on. And secondly, them were poorly absorbed and non-digestible short-chain carbohydrates. Now, if you're giving a lecture and you have to describe them more than 3 times, you've used up most of your time just describing these things. So what we decided we had to have was a collective term for these things, and so we could then develop a better name for the diet. And this is where we had a little competition. And in fact, I would like to say Sue Shepherd won with the creation of the term FODMAP, which actually does describe what these FODMAPs are. And we were told by, I reckon, everyone, this is a horrible term, it's rubbish. No one will ever remember it. And I remember going to meetings and they said, how are the FODMAPs going? You know, funny, I said, how did you remember that? And I got told many sort of terms that we could use, but we stuck to FODMAPs, and it was really a memorable term. We made it into the Oxford Dictionary in 2016, and the Oxford Dictionary even tells us how to pronounce FODMAP. And so in British English, it's FODMAP. In American, it's FADMAP. We also had the problem in American English, Monash is Monash. So now, how do they work? Now, Jackie Barrett did a lot of this work, and I've utilised here a illustration done by Carolyn Tuck, who was one of our PhD students who was here tonight and now a senior researcher, and she drew that. She was a very talented artist. Here on the left is the small intestine, and on the right is the large intestine. And all those funny things in the large intestine are bacteria. Now, Carolyn wasn't very good at perspective, but she was very good at drawing. So when you have these things, the oligosaccharides, they go right through to the large bowel. They don't get digested. Lactose, if you can't digest lactose, that goes all the way through. The polyols and the fructose, these are like the sorbitol and fructose and mannitol, they are partly absorbed, and some of them spill over into the large bowel. What they also do, they're very osmotically active and drag water into the small intestine. And this has been well demonstrated in MRI studies. And what happens is you distend, you stretch up the small bowel and it has a lot more water in it than usual. And that goes through to the large bowel. But what happens to all these when they get into the large bowel? It's like presenting a McDonald's to the bacteria. They ferment it. They gobble it up like mad. And as you're probably aware, fermentation is associated with generation of gases. And these gases are things like hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and in some people methane, which are not, they're not bad on the nose, they're odourless, but lots of it is produced. And what they will do will distend the bowel, that some of that will be expelled to the outside. So what happens is that what we get is more water in the bowel, more gas production. It stretches the bowel wall. And the way that the bowel's nervous system sends messages to the brain to say something's going on there is from these stretch receptors. And so when you stretch it, the signals go up, and in most people, they don't cause any trouble. Maybe a little bit of bloater, but that's all. But where you've got irritable bowel, you've got an increased sensitivity of these stretch. And it's something that in medical speak is visceral hypersensitivity. So that a small bit of stretch is going to have a big lot of flood of information up to the brain. And what happens is you experience abdominal pain, bloating, wind with not at the backside, of course, and the changes to the bowel can create constipation, diarrhoea, or a mixture of them. So what we had a situation where we thought we had a diet, we had a new name, but how do we get people to know this name? And it's a really hard thing to get new names accepted around the globe. And so what we decided to do was to write a hypothesis paper. And by calling it a funny thing like the FODMAP hypothesis, you get FODMAP in the title. And we battled with a journal about this. It's a very good journal. And we battled with them and they accepted it. And we weren't quite sure why they accepted it, because until we looked at it, it was accepted on the 1st of April. So we think they might have thought it was an April Fool's joke. But this had remarkable ability to get to the eyes of gastroenterologists and gastroenterological researchers around the world. And then it was in 2014, so 9 years later, that a study that Emma's going to tell us about got on the front cover of the #1 gastroenterology journal in the world in America, and they had pictures of FODMAPs, and this was a fantastic introduction. People knew we had arrived. This term had arrived. So we were in a situation where we had a diet for people with IBS. We believed it worked in a lot of them. We reckoned that it's going to be a no-brainer to do a study to show that it works. But how do we prove it? And the world is sceptical. All of you would know there's a diet coming out every month or every week on the internet, and hardly any of them have ever been tested really. And so were we just another group just crying out saying, we've got a diet, hey, it works in our people. So what I'd like to do is to introduce to you Emma Halmos, who's an associate professor and who's been working with us from those early days. And she's done a lot of the work, did the pivotal study in this area, and is going to tell us how we proved that it worked. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Peter. So just as Peter's described to you, we had identified a problem in IBS management. We had developed the FODMAP hypothesis, and alongside there was development of the diet by analysing food for FODMAP content. And then, as Peter said, we understood how FODMAPs worked in the body, but the missing bit here, the gap, was that we really needed evidence to show that the low FODMAP diet worked. And for this, we need high-quality research. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we need a treatment that is specific for irritable bowel syndrome. We need to compare a treatment to no treatment. And we need the effects to be real and not placebo. Because if you come and see me as a dietitian, I smile at you and I'm nice to you and I am enthusiastic and say, here's a diet that's going to help you, and it's not me being deceiving. I think this is going to help the person. But with that, inevitably what's going to happen is there's a little bit of placebo in that, and we can't have that in a trial. We also need the effects to be from FODMAPs, which is difficult because we need to make sure there's no coexisting component, of which there are in food. FODMAPs is really commonly found with fibre and with gluten and many other components. And we also don't want any influence of pre-existing ideas, and we all have them. We all think that certain foods cause issue, but we don't want that, so we want people going through a trial to be blinded. And we want them to be adherent to it too. And so this sort of concept is super easy in a drug trial. I give half people drug, half people SIBO, done. And we think that actually when it comes to diet, that should be held to the same standards as a drug trial in what we call proving efficacy and safety. So how well does something work versus what are the negatives, what are the risks? But food is super complex. And we could sort of take something like omega-3 fish oil and extract it and put it in a pill. But that's not really how we eat. We eat fish oil like this in a fish, which is also found in a complex matrix of other things like protein and zinc and iron and calcium. And even more complex, we don't just eat fish. We eat fish in the context of all sorts of other things in food which should also play a role. And so when we say, well, how do we deliver high quality research that's dietary? What we wanted to do and what we did was to recruit people with irritable bowel syndrome who were FODMAP naive, and that was much, much easier done back then than it would be today, and healthy people, and compare them. And we designed 2 diets that were identical for all dietary components except for FODMAPs. And we gave this to people, which was something that nobody did back then. We were, I think, one of the first to do this. And this was to make sure that people were adherent, because they'll eat food that you give them. And we didn't tell them what diet they were on, so they were blinded too. And so this required me cooking with a research chef in a kitchen, lots and lots and lots of food, and then we portioned it out and we vacuum packed it and sealed it and we froze it and delivered it in these little refrigerated vans to the participant. This was quite an undertaking. And this is actual photos of the meals that we gave them. It was really helpful that it tasted nice. So this is what the 2 diets looked like side by side, the normal FODMAP diet and the low FODMAP diet. On the normal FODMAP diet, you can see it's full of things like wheat and rye, whereas on the low FODMAP diet, it is corn, spelt and rice. The fruits on the normal FODMAP diet are apple and pear, whereas on the low FODMAP diet, it's citrus and berries. And all the ingredients that we put and used within the recipes were of high or low FODMAP content. Both diets were matched for calories and protein and carbohydrates and fibre. Both had gluten. The only difference was the FODMAPs. So we knew that if there was a difference between the diet, it had to be from the FODMAPs. So the participants entered into the study, recorded 7 days of their usual diet, and then they were randomised, meaning a flip of the coin, to 21 days of either the normal FODMAP diet. They had at least a 3-week washout, and then they were crossed over to the alternate diet, 21 days of a low FODMAP diet, or vice versa. And every single day they recorded their symptoms from 0 to 100, like this, rating their overall symptoms and specific symptoms of pain, bloating, wind, etc. So we had 38 participants complete the study, 30 of whom had irritable bowel syndrome, it's crossover, so that would be the equivalent of 60, and 8 healthy. So the results of the IBS people. So when we looked at the normal FODMAP diet and compared it to the low FODMAP diet, you can see the low FODMAP diet in green more than halved the symptoms compared to the normal FODMAP diet, and to a level that we would consider reasonably, clinically very good. When we compared this to the healthy people, you can see all their symptoms were really low and unaltered. And this is really good because this means we weren't just driving symptoms by giving the healthy people or all the people heaps and heaps of FODMAPs on the normal FODMAP diet. And so from this study, actually institutes from all over the world were doing their own FODMAP studies, which was great, indicated in the flags on the right here, including US and UK and Canada. And consistently, it was found that up to 3/4 of people with irritable bowel found benefit from the low FODMAP diet. And so FODMAP is now a household name and is recommended by the IBS management guidelines globally. And so we also want to look at the safety of the FODMAP diet. And really 3 aspects that we want to investigate here is the diet nutritionally adequate? Does it cause disordered eating behaviour? And does it disturb the gut microbiota? And studies in this have been ongoing over the years, and more or less these risks are minimised if the diet is done in conjunction with a dietitian. So how do we apply a FODMAP diet? I very strongly believe that this should be dietitian-led, and we're very lucky in this country in that we've got good access to a dietitian. But the first step and most important is to get the diagnosis right. Irritable bowel syndrome is a collection of very non-specific symptoms: abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhoea, constipation. This can be from a myriad of other conditions, including celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, endometriosis. We really want to make sure that the diagnosis is not delayed so that the person gets the right treatment. After the diagnosis is correctly made, the next step is getting that person to understand what irritable bowel is. So really, as Peter was describing this concept of visceral hypersensitivity, to explain that to the person, which basically means the nerves in the colon or the large intestines are heightened or too sensitive, that really fuels or drives the irritable bowel symptoms. So we've got the correct diagnosis and we've educated the person on what irritable bowel is, and we now think they're an appropriate candidate to try diet. Then we do a low FODMAP diet, or a FODMAP diet, which is a 3-step process. We initially restrict FODMAPs, we reintroduce, and then we have a phase of personalisation. So the first step is the low FODMAP diet restriction. We just do this to assess the response of the diet. And what's really good about this diet is there's no whole food group that's removed here. Anything that's high FODMAP that we reduce, we can swap with a suitable alternative of a vegetable, a fruit, dairy. So that's very good. It's sort of swapping system. It really pleases the dietitian as well. And we've got many resources to support, which Jay's going to talk about later. Step 2 is FODMAP reintroduction. Now, if the person has not responded to the FODMAP diet, we stop. We say, okay, we try and find another therapy for them. But if there is good response, this is when we reintroduce foods to assess the FODMAP type and dose that is suitable or tolerated for them. And then finally, personalisation. We've tested the foods, expanded the diet. Now we need to see what that long-term FODMAP restriction is for that person, which is really mapping out foods that they can eat freely, foods that they can eat but perhaps more infrequently or in smaller doses, and foods that will drive symptoms so they'll only have it when they really, really want it. And as a dietitian, we of course judge and make modifications to this program. Sometimes we recommend a simplified or a gentle FODMAP diet, particularly in vulnerable populations such as children, elderly, those at risk of malnutrition, or those who already have dietary restrictions. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Jane to talk about research translation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Associate Professor Jane Muir, who is the head of Translational Nutrition Science and our FODMAP team. Jane.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, so we had this fantastic diet and this wonderful, strong scientific evidence base to it. So how are we going to get this out to people who need it? I had one of our wonderful volunteers of one of our studies used to ring me from the supermarket asking whether we tested this, if we tested broccoli yet, what can I put in my trolley? And when we both agreed this wasn't sustainable, I did promise her that I would find a way to get this information into the hands so she could find it easily. So underpinning this diet this whole diet therapy relies on knowledge, food composition knowledge. This absolutely is key to the development of the diet. And here I've got to acknowledge some of our wonderful, talented team. So we have Alex who heads up our laboratory, Liz here as well. The FODMAP analysis is extremely time-consuming. It's expensive, and it does require very talented team, skilled laboratory staff, which we have. Through all their work, we built this large and unique database of FODMAP food information. We also set these safe cut-off levels so that we could define which foods are low and which foods are high. So here's an example here of low and high FODMAP foods. They both look very similar. And they both look healthy. They're healthy foods. But there's huge differences in the FODMAP content of these foods. And we knew that because of the information we've been gathering in the laboratory. So how are we going to get this information to people? Booklets were going to go out of date very quickly. We used to print sheets. They were out of date as soon as they were printed. So it was really difficult to keep up with the amount of information coming out of the lab and how we could get it to people quickly. We needed a resource that could be updated regularly with all the later tested foods that we were generating. At the time, so this is going back 2012, a long time ago now, smartphone applications were all the go. They just were, people were getting excited about them. So that was a new technology. So we're turning to technology. So in 2012, we launched the Monash University Low-FODMAP Diet app, and at the time it was considered a very innovative digital health solution. And this is what the initial logo looked like. And we used a simple traffic light system. The green was low and the red high, and it's a universal system. Everyone understands the traffic light system, so it really was easy for people to look and understand which foods are going to be low and high. And I do remember I was picking up my children from school on the day we launched this in December 2012. It was loaded onto it was released into the app stores, and they were in the back saying, Mum, it's gone to #1 in the app store. So it was the demand for this diet was out there, and it was just fascinating and frightening. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. We've really released something here. So we've evolved, the app has evolved, and we have our wonderful and talented head of our tech, Bala, here, and we have a slightly, looks different to how it was first released all those years ago. It's continually evolving and being updated. So Bala looks after our apps, all our apps, and all of our tech stack. And you can use our smartphone app. The food guide section is your key to understanding the diet and working out which foods are low and high. This app has certainly taken the diet globally. So all these dots are where the app is now downloaded around the world. In fact, 1.9 million downloads now worldwide. Over 213 countries and territories. And this is September when we checked, it was ranked #1 medical app in 130 countries and territories. This has presented challenges to us, this global appeal. There is barriers with languages, different cultures, different dietary habits. We are working to try and make sure the app is relevant in so many different cultures and languages. It is now available in a number of languages: French, German, Italian, Spanish, and actually just today, Bala said the Japanese was released. So it's now we've released this to the world, we are just chasing it to keep up with the demand. So the diet going global has had both impact and challenges. The demand from patients, this is back in 2014, finding just suitable foods is really hard for them. So in supermarkets, they just had no idea which foods would be safe and low FODMAP for them. So we developed the Monash University Low-FODMAP Certified Food Program. Liz heads up this. This is here. Alex helps, and Evelyn is here, members of our team. So now you can find our little logo on food products. All of these would be low FODMAP, safe to have, and you'll find this logo now on certified products worldwide, in supermarkets worldwide, and you can again use the app to find these products. Again, the challenges of impact, having something go global like this, for us, we were really worried about the diet becoming a fad, and also we didn't want it to be the next gluten-free type diet. So our solution to this is really education. So Jane Varney, who heads up our education group, Jimmy and Lyndall helped there. And so our approach was really to provide courses and training for dietitians and also for the general public. So we have online courses available for dietitians and patients, over 17,000 enrolments in over 120 countries. You can see here the spread and the areas where it's most popular. We have a dietitians directory. We have over 2,000 dietitians, our trained dietitians, in over 70 countries now. And again, patients can find their local dietitian through the app, which is fantastic. That's been really, really great because they can find their dietitian somewhere close to where they live. That's been great. We've also made the course available in different languages. Again, this is an ongoing thing that we have to deal with all the time, but it's a huge task. We are making the material more available in different languages. The other solution we have continuing is the support of our community. And so we have Chloe there, we have Mon, who's our graphic designer, but Chloe sort of really looks after us as far as all the inquiries, website information, Facebook, Instagram, X, all the social media, all of the activity that it goes on behind and supporting this diet is huge. So Chloe does a fantastic job. And resources, Mon is our graphic designer. So the resources are all really well done, accessible and easy for people to use and presented really well. So research translation, which is what this story's been about. The FODMAP story has been a great example of that, and I think the data is so important for us to generate that as scientists, and we know that is very important. The big challenge is to get that information out there into the hands of people who need it. We have learned that we have to build an ecosystem. We built this whole ecosystem to support it, and we have a dedicated, talented team to help that ecosystem. So all of that together was really important part of this translation story, and I think that's something that's been a great journey, and we're still on it. And the next one I think is we're going back to Peter about where the story continues. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Jane. Well, it might sound that we've been while this has all been happening, the story continues, and there's lots of research that's being done by our group. We've got new evidence-based reasons to use it, and we're all about evidence. We're not about just finding an idea. We've got to prove it. And for abdominal symptoms in women with endometriosis, most neglected area, and that Jane Varney has just completed a fantastic trial showing the benefits of the diet in this situation. We had a bizarre situation where breastfeeding mothers whose children had colic, and if any of you have had children with colic, it's bad business for the mother. Anyway, they said, I went on the low-FODMAP diet and my child's better, and we said, that can't possibly be true because we don't know the mechanism. And so Marina Yakovou, who was did a PhD, she's a paediatric dietitian, and she did a study examining this very thing and showed that yes, the children did get better. We still haven't worked out how it works. For when the symptoms are further north than the lower bowel, what we'll call functional dyspepsia, the diet also seems to work. And for that, we worked with Vicky Tan, a gastroenterologist who trained with us in Melbourne and is now in Hong Kong. And we worked together where she showed that the diet works just as well there because functional dyspepsia is more common in Hong Kong than in Melbourne. People with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, also get symptoms even when their inflammation is controlled with the fancy drugs we have now. And one of the earliest things we did was show that low-FODMAP diet was excellent for this situation. And I show here Richard Geary and Peter Irving, who are two fellows who are now the superstars, Richard of New Zealand and Peter of UK as gastroenterologists. We've also looked at the way to use it in special circumstances. Now, people do tend to reduce their fibre intake when they reduce FODMAPs, even when the dietitians teach it so well. And what fibres should you use? Is it safe? Will it make them worse? And this is where Dan So and C.K. Yao did some excellent studies defining the physiology and what supplements should be used. And then, can you then avoid having to reduce your diet, change your diet, and just use enzymes to break down the FODMAPs? And this is where we called upon our artist extraordinaire, thanks Carolyn, Carolyn, who did a fantastic PhD looking at one type of enzyme to see whether it can make things better for people. And it wasn't quite as good as we'd hoped, but this is just the start of that thing, because Ellie Anderson shown there is just about to start a trial of an expanded set of enzymes. And then Emma's already talked about what happens when people who really can't cope or shouldn't really have too much restriction. They might be young, they might be very old. I'd go on on one of these diets. And Emma has developed the FODMAP Gentle, which is a very excellent way of dealing with this. And finally, safety is such an important thing. We have been told that we are destroying the microbiota of people. We are causing eating disorders. We are doing all sorts of terrible things to people. And this has all been studied during COVID in an incredibly difficult study by Hannah Silver, a PhD, looking at this in 72 people who had been taught the diet over 14 years ago, or 7 to 14 years ago. And this was an incredibly important study to show they are really, really doing very well. And we're not destroying the microbiota, we're not creating eating disorders. So with all of that, it's been an absolute pleasure, this journey for me, working with brilliant people who get on well and who all pitch in to do the hard work. And you can see it's a multi-pronged thing.
Thank you everyone for joining us.